LiSTNR production.
A man who came to be known as Dr. Death. The Crown versus Patel is one of the most significant and controversial cases in Queensland's legal history. The trials involved complex issues of medical negligence, criminal liability, and systemic failures in healthcare oversight. The case left his victims' families searching for answers, underscoring the devastating consequences that can arise when systemic failures go unaddressed. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insider's Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. Tony Hoffman was nurse unit manager at Bundaberg Base Hospital in 2003. She had noticed a surgeon hired by the hospital was, by her assessment, grossly incompetent. She went to hospital management and was ignored. Tony Hoffman was also beginning to question the doctor's claims in relation to his experience. One day, he said he was an expert in cardiothoracic surgery. On another day, he claimed he had been a trauma surgeon in New York. Tony Hoffman kept her concerns to herself, but not for long. Dr. Jayant Patel began his medical career in India, where he completed a master's degree in surgery at MP Shah Medical Hospital, part of Saurashtra University. He then moved to the United States, finishing his surgical internship and residency at the University of Rochester School of Medicine in New York. However, his professional record, which would come back to haunt him, was far from spotless. In the year 2000, medical authorities in Oregon sanctioned him for unprofessional conduct. As a result, he was banned from performing surgeries on the pancreas and liver and was required to seek a second opinion before undertaking complex surgical procedures. He was then hired by Queensland Health without any vetting of his background. Dr. Patel operated on around 1,000 patients in his time at Bundaberg Hospital. 13 died and many more suffered severe injuries. Tony Hoffman began to realize Patel was responsible for unnecessary surgeries, poor surgical outcomes, and patient deaths. Despite her repeated complaints, the hospital's administration did not take any action. Staff at the hospital were starting to call Dr. Patel Dr. Death. Tony took matters into her own hands. 2 years after first alerting hospital management, Tony approached Rob Messenger, who was, at the time, the National Party MP for Burnett. Messenger was born and raised in Bundaberg. The MP recorded a detailed interview with Tony and prepared a file. Tony Hoffman also gave Rob Messenger a letter she had sent to management at the hospital in October the year before. A week later, Messenger used parliamentary privilege to name Patel. He addressed the Queensland Parliament just after midday on March the 22nd, 2005. For the protection of patients at the Bundaberg Base Hospital Intensive Care Unit and the well-being of the medical staff, I make public and table a letter from the nurse unit manager of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU. This letter alleges serious concerns relating to the behaviour and clinical competence of Dr. Patel, an overseas trained surgeon working at the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU. The letter submitted to the management of the Bundaberg Base Hospital on or around the 22nd of October 2004 lists the cases of approximately 14 former patients of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU, who the writer believed required formal investigations. Rob Messenger then read a string of allegations against Dr. Patel, including suggestions that anyone who tried to alert the authorities about their concerns were told they would lose their jobs. This perception, the letter said, was indeed perpetrated by Dr. Patel on a daily basis. Rob Messenger then told the Parliament, "An investigation or a fact-finding mission was launched to examine these claims and was carried out by Queensland Health's Chief Health Officer Dr. Fitzgerald approximately 3 to 4 weeks ago. We have heard this morning no findings have been released. Staff are fearing a cover-up. In order to restore confidence in the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU, I call on the Health Minister to immediately release the findings of any report or fact-finding mission that has been conducted by Queensland Health. I also call on the Health Minister to launch immediately an independent, comprehensive review of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU and its administration. I challenge the Minister to guarantee that all staff members who choose to give evidence be afforded full whistleblower status and that they be protected from any vindictive administrative action. Pending the results of this investigation, the Minister must immediately stand aside and suspend from work Surgeon Dr. Patel and senior administrative staff Peter Leck and Dr. Darren Keating. I have spoken with staff of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU who have said the following in response to being asked if they were scared. I guess I'm more distressed than scared because I've watched patients die and I feel that every time I see him, referring to Dr. Patel, walk into the unit, I feel sick because I just think who he's going to kill now, what he's going to do now. And we all feel like that. All the nurses feel like that. They feel physically ill when he walks in because they just know that he's going to try and interfere with something, operate on someone, and cause more of a problem and a complication, stop a transfer which has been arranged, and transfers, they're difficult things to arrange, you know. Brisbane doesn't often have beds. The staff of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU are desperate. 8 out of 18 nursing staff are on stress leave. Premier Peter Beattie announced a hastily convened inquiry just over 2 weeks later. It was to be led by former Queensland Judge Tony Morris, QC. It became known as the Bundaberg Hospital Commission of Inquiry. Tony Hoffman addressed the inquiry on the second day of hearings. She said it was common knowledge around the small Queensland town about the incompetence of Dr. Patel. Tony said they didn't just call him Dr. Death. She told the inquiry they would also call him Dr. E. coli. It was very well known about Dr. Patel's abilities. The nursing staff anywhere would say, if I have an accident on the weekend, fly me to Brisbane. Don't you let Dr. Patel touch me. Tony Hoffman repeated claims she'd made to Rob Messenger, who had subsequently repeated those claims in Parliament. She also told the inquiry about a patient named Des Bramage. Staff were horrified and left traumatised after watching Patel stab Mr. Bramage in the chest up to 50 times in an apparent bid to drain suspected fluid from a sac near his heart. Tony Hoffman said, at this time, the nursing staff were just desperate to stop him operating anymore. She told the inquiry that even after she had raised concerns with Rob Messenger and the claims were heard in Parliament, there was never an attempt by Queensland Health to try to find out whether any of this was true. She said the only attempt that was made was to further bully and intimidate us and threaten us with jail and all sorts of other things. It wasn't until Tony contacted the renowned journalist Hedley Thomas that she got results. Mr. Thomas did a simple Google search and immediately found what he was looking for. He called Tony straight away. He said, "We've got him." Hedley Thomas had uncovered, via a quick Google search, what authorities in Queensland had failed to check. Patel had been dismissed as a doctor in the United States for gross negligence. Now, he was operating on people at a public hospital in Bundaberg. Coming up, how and why Patel was hired, and how the courts failed to hold him to account. So how did someone like Dr. Jayant Patel get hired in the first place? Queensland Health dropped the ball. As the main body running public hospitals, it was responsible for checking Patel's background, and it didn't. If it had looked closely, it would have found that he'd been disciplined in the United States, had restrictions placed on his license, and was even banned from working in some hospitals over there. But somehow, none of that was flagged. And as we know, at Bundaberg Base Hospital, the people in charge ignored warnings from staff, including Tony Hoffman. The parliamentary inquiry heard the district manager, Peter Leck, and Director of Medical Services, Dr. Darren Keating, ignored those warning signs. Nurses and other staff raised questions again and again, but they were either brushed off or pressured to stay quiet. The inquiry heard it was because the hospital was short-staffed and they needed a surgeon. There also wasn't a proper national process back then for checking if foreign-trained doctors had red flags in other countries. Patel looked good on paper, and no one did the deeper digging. The whole system was toxic. So was the inquiry. The Queensland Supreme Court ruled that Commissioner Tony Morris QC had demonstrated apprehended bias, meaning there was a reasonable perception that he might not be impartial. The finding came after Peter Leck and Dr. Darren Keating applied to the Supreme Court. The key issue was that Morris made public comments and conducted himself in a way that appeared prejudicial to individuals involved, particularly the two senior Queensland health officials. Judge Martin Moynihan of the Queensland Supreme Court found that Morris had given the appearance of prejudging certain individuals, undermining the fairness of the inquiry process. The inquiry was terminated on the 1st of September 2005. It was replaced by the Davies Commission of Inquiry, led by Geoffrey Davies QC, a retired Court of Appeal judge. The key finding from the Davies inquiry was the employment of Dr. Patel was the result of a catastrophic failure of the systems meant to protect the public. The Commissioner handed his report to the Queensland Parliament on November 30, 2005. He said, 4 factors, in my opinion, contributed to Dr. Patel's sustained path of injury and death at Bundaberg Base Hospital. They were 1, the hospital budget, and the hospital budget contributed in 2 ways. The first was that, although a director of surgery is ordinarily, and should be, a registered specialist surgeon, a surgeon who had Australian specialist qualifications would have probably required an offer of salary and conditions more generous than Queensland Health would have permitted the hospital to offer. And so also would an overseas-trained specialist surgeon who would have been able to satisfy the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons that his qualifications and experience were sufficient for them to recommend that he be granted deemed specialist registration. It is unlikely that the hospital would ever have obtained the money to pay this. The second aspect was the focus, dictated by the budget, upon elective surgery throughput. Dr. Patel made himself so valuable in that respect that the administrators were plainly reluctant to offend him, let alone investigate him. 2. The failure to check his background. Both the Medical Board and Queensland Health failed to check the credentials which he submitted. Had that been done, his discreditable past would probably have been revealed. The third factor was the failure to have him credentialed and privileged. At no stage did Mr. Leck or Dr. Keating have Dr. Patel's skill and competence assessed by a committee of his peers under Queensland health policy and guidelines. That should have been done before he commenced to see or operate upon patients at the hospital, and again before he was re-employed a year later. The fourth factor was the failure of any adequate complaint system to operate. This failure was caused, in part, by the budget system and the focus of both Dr. Keating and Mr. Leck upon the maintenance of the elective surgery target. But it is hard to believe that, if Dr. Keating had been constantly confronted with the accumulating number and seriousness of complaints, as he should have been under any proper system, he would not have felt obliged to act. In retrospect, it is perhaps unsurprising that these causes of Dr. Patel's appointment and continued course of conduct causing death and serious injury emerged as a cause of problems in other hospitals, which were, in whole or in part, the subject of evidence before this commission. Patel left Australia for the United States in 2005 amid growing scrutiny. 3 years later, he was extradited back to Australia to face criminal charges. It took a further 2 years for him to face justice. In 2010, after a 58-day trial in the Supreme Court of Queensland, Patel was convicted of 3 counts of manslaughter, 1 count of grievous bodily harm. The original criminal trial focused on 4 patients treated by Dr. Patel at Bundaberg Base Hospital between 2003 and 2005. The first was a manslaughter charge over the death of 75-year-old Mervyn Morris. Mr. Morris had significant health issues, including kidney failure and heart disease. Patel performed a colostomy, a bowel surgery, despite warnings from other staff that Mr. Morris was too ill for surgery. Mr. Morris died several hours after surgery. The Crown argued the operation was medically inappropriate and that Patel ignored expert advice, leading to a preventable death. The second manslaughter charge was in relation to the death of 46-year-old James Phillips. He was suffering from a chronic esophageal condition requiring a feeding tube. Patel performed a resection of the esophagus, a complex procedure normally done in specialist hospitals. Mr. Phillips developed complications and died. The surgery was not urgent or appropriate for a regional hospital setting. The prosecution said Patel lacked the expertise and ignored safer alternatives. The third manslaughter charge was in relation to the death of 77-year-old Gerardus Kemps. He had multiple comorbidities, including cardiovascular disease. He underwent removal of part of the bowel due to concerns about cancer, although pathology later showed it was unnecessary. Mr. Kemps died from post-operative complications. It was alleged that Patel misdiagnosed the need for surgery and that the patient was not fit for such a procedure. The grievous bodily harm charge was in relation to Ian Vowles. Mr. Vowles had a history of bowel issues. Patel performed a colectomy, a removal of the colon, despite medical imaging suggesting the disease could be managed non-surgically. He survived, but was left with life-altering injuries and a severely diminished quality of life. The charge related to the long-term damage caused by Patel's decision to operate when it was medically unjustified. These patients' cases formed the basis of the prosecution's argument that Dr. Patel was criminally negligent, not simply making medical errors, but making reckless decisions in breach of his duty of care, resulting in death or serious harm. The prosecution's case centered on the assertion that Dr. Patel's decision to perform certain surgeries was grossly negligent, thereby constituting criminal conduct. The legal arguments were grounded in specific provisions of the Queensland Criminal Code, Section 288. This section imposes a duty on individuals performing dangerous acts, such as surgery, to exercise reasonable care and skill. The prosecution argued that Dr. Patel breached his duty by undertaking complex surgeries without the necessary competence, leading to fatal outcomes. And Section 282. This provision offers a defence for surgical procedures performed with reasonable care and skill. The prosecution contended that Dr. Patel's actions did not meet this standard, thus negating the applicability of this defence. The central argument was that Dr. Patel's decision to operate, given his lack of requisite skill and the complexity of the procedures, was so unreasonable that it amounted to criminal negligence. The defence challenged the prosecution's interpretation of the aforementioned legal provisions, arguing that Section 288 pertains to the manner in which a procedure is performed, not the decision to undertake it. Therefore, even if the decision to operate was flawed, it did not constitute a breach of this duty. And in relation to Section 282, the defence maintained that this section provides a defence for surgical procedures performed with reasonable care and skill, regardless of the outcome. They argued that Dr. Patel's actions fell within this scope. The defence emphasised that adverse outcomes in surgery do not inherently indicate criminal negligence, especially in complex medical cases. The trial judge ruled that Section 288 was applicable to the case, allowing the prosecution to argue that Dr. Patel's decision to operate breached his duty of care. Patel was found guilty of 3 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of grievous bodily harm. He served 2 years in prison before the conviction made its way to the Court of Appeal. In the Court of Appeal, the defence argued that the trial judge erred in applying Section 288 to the decision to operate. The appellate court upheld the trial judge's interpretation, maintaining that the duty of care extended to the decision-making process in surgical procedures. However, the case then went all the way to the High Court of Australia, which unanimously quashed Dr. Patel's convictions. The High Court found that a miscarriage of justice had occurred due to the prosecution's significant alteration of its case during the trial, introducing prejudicial evidence that was irrelevant to the charges. This shift compromised the fairness of the trial, necessitating a retrial. However, the manslaughter and grievous bodily harm charges were dropped by the Director of Public Prosecutions. In the subsequent trial, Patel pleaded guilty to 4 counts of fraud relating to his application to work as a doctor in Australia. He was handed a 2-year sentence, wholly suspended. Judge Terence Martin told Patel, "You calculatedly deceived your way into that position. I see no indication of, and hear no expression of, your genuine remorse for your offending." He walked free that day. Days later, he was on a plane out of Australia. The doctor death case exposed significant deficiencies in Queensland's healthcare system, prompting comprehensive reforms aimed at enhancing patient safety and medical oversight. It prompted the Queensland government to establish the Health Quality and Complaints Commission. At a national level, it prompted the creation of the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. which consolidated the registration and accreditation of health practitioners across Australia. It also resulted in stronger whistleblower protections. Toni Hoffman was pivotal in bringing Patel to justice, but she later told Hedley Thomas her life was never the same again. In Commissioner Davis's report, he says under the title, Conclusion, it is impossible to consider the history of complaints against Dr. Patel without one matter impressing itself forcefully. Within 8 weeks of the commencement of Dr. Patel's employment, there was a very serious complaint relating to 2 esophagectomies. From that time, there was a long history of patients who received terrible outcomes, and people, whether they be patients, relatives, or for that matter medical staff, who were deeply affected by experiences. Notwithstanding that first complaint in May 2003, Queensland Health did not obtain a surgeon's review of Dr. Patel's work until June 2005, when Dr. Peter Woodruff provided his section of the review team's report. It was painfully obvious to Dr. Woodruff, and indeed the other 2 surgeons who subsequently reviewed Dr. Patel's work, that he was not a competent surgeon. One must ask then, how the system failed Bundaberg so badly. Thanks for listening to Crime Insider's Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at LiSTNR Crime or TikTok at LiSTNR Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins, with sound design by Niall Fernandez. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.